Good morning, Exeter. It's a pleasure to be here and to introduce our distinguished award recipient, David C. Bohn. As an alumnus, parent to 3 Exonians, and grandparent to another, you have been connected to the Academy for 60 years. Exeter has continually benefited from your intentional care and deep devotion to building community within the class of 1957 and looking after the needs of generations of students and faculty. In 1954, you came to Exeter as a scholarship student from Medford, Massachusetts. You were one of Hammy's boys, the group of more than 800 students recruited to Exeter by H. Hamilton Hammy Bissell, class of 1929. Then the director of scholarships. The son of a high school lacrosse coach, you excelled in the sport at the Academy before earning All-American honors at Harvard and setting the university's all-time scoring record, a mark that remained unbroken for 51 years. After serving in the U.S. Navy as a pilot, you began your civilian career flying for Eastern Airlines. In the early 1970s, you moved your family to Exeter, pulled by the memory of a New England town that would be a welcoming place for you and Barbara, honorary class of 1957, to raise Brian, Bradley, and Diane. An innocuous request first drew you back to campus. In the spring of 1973, athletic director Ted Seabrook asked you to assist the new lacrosse coach. You could not have imagined then that the handful of weekly practices would extend to a 5-decade relationship with Exeter lacrosse. You have enjoyed several stints as a junior varsity assistant coach while consistently refusing payment for your services. When school regulations eventually required you to join the payroll, you returned your entire salary to the Exeter by way of donation. Each year, you are an ever-present figure at practices and games as you help mentor the next generation of players. A friend recalls you as a, quote, rabid fan of Exeter lacrosse and a positive force for the sport. The White House at 72 Front Street has been like the Academy's living room since you moved there in 1975. You have entertained hundreds of visiting Exonians for meals, overnight stays, and walking tours of town. You and Barbara became surrogate parents for your classmates' children and now for their grandchildren as well. For nearly 40 years, the families of the class of 1957 have sent children and relatives to the Academy, knowing they had a place to go for a familiar face, a home-cooked meal, and a listening ear. Your open hospitality was effortless. As you have remarked, what could have been more pleasant or natural than being a home away from home for children of classmates and friends? While you were an unofficial guardian to Academy students, your attention has extended to many others in the community. Your beautiful dahlias, Barbara's homemade pies, and your cheerful, invigorating company have been ever present as well-known friends from Exeter's past, such as Hammy Bissell, Bill Clark, class of 31, David Coffin, Don Cole, Jim Griswold, Dick Niebling, class of 34. Their wives and others moved into life's later stages. Your tender care and unwavering commitment to the extended Exeter family has been unmatched. Every 5 years, you take special pride in opening your home as headquarters for your class reunion. Dinner served in the backyard are followed by hours of conversation on the porch. Throughout the reunion, and in the days before and following, your door is always open to classmates who know they can drop in to visit and enjoy a cold beer, a hot cup of coffee, or a donut or two anytime. You have served Exeter in your class in official capacity as president, vice president, class agent, and correspondent, and as a director of the General Alumni Association. However, these titles never adequately captured the depth of your service to your class. In the days before the internet, your regular correspondence kept classmates connected to each other and to Exeter. To this day, you are often seen in the alumni office, searching for contact information on behalf of classmates, submitting class notes to the Exeter Bulletin, or delivering flowers and produce from your garden to staff members. When Hammy Bissell retired and moved to Elliott Street, the two of you reconnected during many long conversations over your backyard fence. The Bissells became Uncle Hammy and Aunt Sally, adopted members of the Bohn family. This kinship is not surprising. You carry on Hammy's legacy. Uncle Hammy was the inaugural Founders Day Award recipient, and it is only fitting that 38 years later, an alumnus with an equal level of devotion to Exeter and the same goodwill to all receives this honor. Besides Hammy, a friend said, I'm not sure I've known anyone who truly loved Exeter and Exonians more than David Bohn. The torch Hammy Bissell carried has passed to you, and you have responded with unending affection for the Academy and for every Exonian. In recognition of your service and importance to the Exeter community, we proudly present you with the 2014 Founders Day Award.
I got all these papers here, and I got nothing more to say. David, thank you so much, and thank you to the selection committee for inviting me here today. I'm humbled and honored. And I want to add my special welcome to the class of 1964, celebrating their 50th reunion. We had our 50th reunion a few years ago. It rained, it poured for 4 days, but you know, it didn't matter. We had a wonderful time anyway. And now, in the spirit of transparency, I feel that I must tell you, this is not my first time on this stage on a memorable occasion. Go for it. The last time I stood here was on a spring evening in 1957. I was with a group of friends, and we were carrying Mr. Bossetto's Volkswagen. I'm sure that you can all recall back to January and February when we were in the midst of our winter to remember. Am I the only one who had never before heard of the polar vortex? Barbara and I were hunkered down in our house up the street on a cold, windy Friday afternoon in early February when the phone rang. On the other end was Harold Brown, Director of Alumni and Parent Relations. He said that he was calling on behalf of the President of the Trustees to tell me that I had been selected as this year's Founders Day Award recipient. On the following Monday, the Academy sent out an email announcing all this, and I began to receive some congratulatory calls and emails. Soon, I began to see a recurring theme in the messages from my classmates. A typical message read something like, "Hi Dave, congratulations on winning that award. Too bad Barbara's name isn't on it, too." A very astute group, that class of 1957. Of course, I wouldn't be here today without Barbara's willing and thoughtful support and counsel all these years. Barbara has acted as hostess, as you've already heard, most of this stuff. You don't have to pay attention. Barbara has acted as hostess for many class reunions, stand-in parent for lots of children and grandchildren of the class of 1957, purveyor of apple pie, milk, and hot chocolate to hungry students in need of a home-like atmosphere. One, a member of the class of 1979, recently wrote a note extolling the recuperative powers of Barbara's famous Dixie bars. In recent years, she has adopted the hungry writers at the Exonian, for whom she bakes every Wednesday. Barbara was elected an honorary member of the class of 1957 at our 25th reunion. Barbara, the class of 1957, and I want to thank you for all that you do. As I planned my remarks for today, I fortuitously took down from the bookshelf a volume entitled The Story of Phillips Exeter by Myron R. Williams. Mr. Williams had been hired in 1918 and was the most senior member of the faculty in 1957, the year he wrote that book. The book listed the names and tenures of all administrators and instructors starting in 1783. Of particular interest to me, of course, were those special gentlemen still teaching in 1957. Some had been hired in the 1920s, but many were hired during the decade after the Harkness gift of 1931, during which time the size of the faculty essentially doubled. They had started their careers here at the beginning of the Harkness era, and when we moved back to Exeter in 1972, right at the start of coeducation, Many of them were retiring. Their careers were bookended by arguably the two most important events in the school's history. Before I go on to talk about our life in Exeter, I want to digress for a moment and finish up with Myron Williams. When we were in school here, a high point each year was a visit from the poet Robert Frost. We didn't realize it at the time, but one reason for these visits was Frost's friendship with Mr. Williams. In the 1950s, our present home was owned by the Academy, and Mr. Williams lived there. When we bought the house, we heard rumors that Robert Frost had written a poem about the grape arbors in our backyard. We never located the poem, but thanks to Mr. Ed DeRocher, the Academy archivist, we were able to find the Williams guest book, which verified that Mr. Frost did indeed visit regularly at the time of the year that the grapes generally ripen. As I sat in my library reading Mr. Williams' book, I got excited to think that perhaps some of his work on the book had taken place in that very room, or that Williams and Frost had sat there in front of that very same fireplace discussing the affairs of Exeter and the world. I choose to believe that both of these images are accurate. What was Exeter like in 1957? You've all probably heard my era characterized by its sink or swim atmosphere. Consider the following quote, attributed to George B. Rogers, another emeritus. He refers to the important parts of the founders' beliefs that had persisted into 1957. Quote, reverence for duty as the spring of all our actions, a respect for work as such, a scorn for softness, a belief in discipline, in strictest justice, and in individual freedom. These are Puritan qualities, and the school, through all these generations, remains a Puritan school. This is pretty harsh stuff, but in truth, it doesn't accurately describe our experience at Exeter. If one behaved reasonably well, there was little fear of the swift and strict justice system. Obviously, the world and the school have done a lot of evolving since the 1950s. We started with that Puritan ethic, and you can imagine how much the advent of coeducation hastened many of these changes. I have a sense that a third most important event in Exeter's history may now be playing out. Can technology be called an event? We follow with interest the frequent articles in the Exonian as the faculty examine how best to integrate new technology into the pedagogy. I don't know where it's heading, but consider where we were back in 1982 as we approached our 25th reunion. Due to my address on Front Street, I had become an important liaison between our class and the Academy, specifically Jan Woodford. Of course, this was back in the dark ages before cell phones, computers, and email. Our method of communication seemed to be that classmates would funnel requests through me, and I would regularly walk the couple hundred yards to Jan's office and get the official word from headquarters. This was fine with me, as I got to see all the nice people in that building, and in the fall, I brought them dahlias. For our 25th reunion, we decided to publish a yearbook. We mailed forms to everyone and asked them to summarize the past 25 years of their life and send the forms back to me. We hired Kathy Pottle to organize and type it all up for the printer. I find it interesting that Kathy is listed in this year's Facebook as a web services administrator in the information technology department. Who would have thunk it back in 1982? Anyway, the classmate who was to have contacted his friend in the printing business to get us a good price bailed out on us. But another classmate said that a new store called Kinko's we'd never heard of him, had opened around the corner from his office in New York City, and maybe they could help. So I hopped on an airplane with my briefcase of biographies and headed to New York. The next week, I received a big box in the mail containing 300 yearbooks. I was really proud of this monumental achievement. I tell this story because I imagine that most of the students here could probably produce a much more professional result than ours and never leave their dorm room. We have come so far, so fast. Where do we go from here? In closing, I want to borrow a few words from our old friend Hammy Bissell, the first recipient of the Founders Day Award back in 1976. This seems appropriate to me since Mr. Bissell was here at the beginning of my journey, and we were backyard neighbors for most of the last 25 years of his life. Mr. Bissell was director of Scholarship Boys in the 1950s, and I'm proud to have been one of Hammy's boys. You students may know the name Bissell from the admissions office, Hammy's Way, and the plaque by the bridge going out to the stadium. Hammy loved to talk, and he had a flowery way of expressing even the most mundane thoughts. And he loved Exeter. Many of us remember him saying that Exeter is not just my world, it's my universe. I'm not sure where I stand along Hammy's spectrum of love, but Exeter is certainly a central part of our life. Thanks to so many of you who have helped make this such a wonderful journey. And thank you all for listening.